Hi everybody, this is Katje. Tonight I'm modeling my new fall look. It includes this mid-length dress that I purchased from Forever 21. One of the stores that I mentioned last time offers a lot of clothes that fit me very well. So I bought this mid-length dress there. I've combined it with my high heels with lace weave, sort of picking up the pattern in the dress, and I'm also wearing a couple of accessories, which, as I mentioned last time, can be a very nice way of filling out an outfit. So tonight what I want to do is, in honor of Halloween, I want to tell a couple of stories about the way Halloween used to be, at least when I was growing up and was a younger person. And back then, Halloween was a little edgier, it was a little more dangerous, a little scarier. Today, there's not so much trick-or-treating anymore, and that's understandable. A lot of children go to functions at a school or a church. They go there instead of going out trick-or-treating, and I certainly understand that given the world that we live in, there are a lot of bad people out there, so it's probably safer for them to participate in some of those collective activities at a school or a church, but there is something missing. Because Halloween used to be edgier, like I said, and so that was something that I remember and wanted to say a little bit about. So what I'm going to do is just tell a couple of stories, and in the middle I want to say something a little bit about fear. But the first story I want to tell was when I was in high school and was with a friend, and we used to get into a lot of mischief, especially around Halloween. So at that point I had a car, and we had been driving through this neighborhood, and we saw this house which had a very large pumpkin on it. It hadn't been carved. It was just a large pumpkin that somebody had put out on the stoop as a kind of fall decoration. Now, I'm not recommending this. Please don't think in any way that I am holding this up as an example of good behavior. It was not. I was kind of a troublemaker growing up, and so I'm just trying to relate the story because I think it's kind of funny. But anyway, my friend and I, being the mischievous troublemakers that we were, decided that we wanted to steal this pumpkin. And so we waited. It was on Halloween night, or right around that time, maybe a couple of nights before. And so when it was dark, we parked the car on a street below this hill where the house was with the pumpkin. And so then we went up there and we stole the pumpkin, and we took it down into the woods and we smashed it, which is not a good thing, but like I said, we were mischievous. So then we went back to the car after we'd done this, and that's when I realized that I did not have my car keys with me and I could not find them. So now we were in kind of a pickle because we'd just stolen this pumpkin and smashed it, which was a bad thing to do, but that's what we did. And now, going back to my car, which was a little yellow Honda Civic, I still, in a kind of stupid way, had lost my keys, or I don't know, I must have dropped them at some point, either on the way up to the house or on the way back, but I couldn't find them. So then the question that my friend and I had before us then was, well, what are we going to do? So to make a long story short, we cooked up some elaborate story or tale about how we had been driving along, and then for some reason we had driven up onto the side street in this residential neighborhood, and so I had been driving, and then my friend was going to drive the car. We told his father and my parents that, and at some point when I got out of the car and we were going to switch places and he was going to drive, we lost the keys and we kept looking for them and we couldn't find them. So all of this was a total fabrication. And his father, and mother too for that matter, and my parents, they knew something was not right about that. They didn't really believe it, but they couldn't really prove us wrong, so we got away with it. Unfortunately, we succeeded in smashing the pumpkin and getting away with this ridiculous lie about, parking the car somewhere and exchanging seats and then losing the keys. But that was Halloween back then, and that was the kind of mischief that a lot of us enjoyed getting into. Now, I wanted to say just a little bit of something about the emotion of fear, which I think is at the center of any really good Halloween experience. And fear sometimes has to do, obviously, with real things. Fear can be fear of a wild animal that we feel is a threat to us, or it might be fear of a person who is acting in a very aggressive way. It might be fear of a storm that's bearing down on us. So obviously, as human beings have evolved over time, the emotion of fear has, from an evolutionary standpoint, it has served to alert human beings to possible dangers in their environment so that they would survive those or be able to get away, and that would facilitate the survival of the species. But sometimes the fear is a very, very primitive emotion, and it's buried deep in the limbic system of the human brain, which is probably the most primitive part of the human brain. And so sometimes when you have fear, it's irrational, it's not really responding to something real, and you may even know that, and yet you still feel this fear. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So I remember when I was growing up watching the original version of Salem's Lot. And Salem's Lot, there's a later version that's not very good, but the earlier version with David Soul and Lance Kerwin and James Straker, I can't remember his name, but there's another person in there who was a very fine actor playing sort of a heavy role of bad guy. But this is a vampire movie for those of you who don't know it, and I really recommend that you see it because it is quite scary. So in this film, it's James Mason, that was his name. He played a character named Straker, who was actually bringing this very evil vampire into this community that then began attacking people who turned into vampires, and they attacked other people in kind of a geometric progression until the whole town is basically overrun by vampires. So anyway, I remembered that, maybe some of you who've seen this, it was on television for a couple of nights, I think, there's this particular scene where the vampire Barlow that Straker brings to the town has already attacked one of the children, Danny, I think his name is, and this is when the children are in the woods. Danny and his brother, they're in the woods, and so one of them disappears mysteriously, and this is the one who's been attacked by the vampire. So later, there's this really eerie, creepy scene where the child who's become a vampire comes to the window of his brother's bedroom. His brother is a little bit older than he is, and the vampire child begins to tap at the window and scratch at it almost the way an animal would, until his brother gets up and lets him in, and then the vampire child proceeds to bite his brother, attack him, and suck blood out of his neck until eventually the older brother dies as well. Now, my point is that when I saw that scene, I don't believe in vampires. I didn't believe in vampires at the time, but it was a very frightening scene. It was a very eerie, creepy scene, and I remember, even though I didn't believe in vampires and still don't, I remember at the time that it really gave me bad dreams, to the point that I even had to put a crucifix under my pillow just in case what? I didn't believe that there were vampires, but this fear, this kind of primitive fear that's deep in the limbic system of the brain, really was an irrational one that I had. And I knew that. Even though I knew that there wasn't anything like that, that didn't make the fear go away. So sometimes fear is like that. It's not really tracking anything real, but even though that's the case, and even though we realize it, it still is in us. So that's kind of an irrational fear. Now, the second and last story that I wanted to tell about Halloween was a little more humorous, and this is something that some other friends of mine and myself did one Halloween. There was this guy who lived in a neighborhood adjacent to mine who was kind of a sourpuss. He was kind of a curmudgeon, and he was sort of the kind of neighbor who would, if somebody crossed over his yard, or even put a foot on his yard, he'd start yelling at them and start giving them a hard time. So he was kind of a, sourpuss, like I said, kind of in a pretty bad mood most of the time. So we decided on Halloween that we were going to sort of pay him back for this. And what we did was we bought like 2 big boxes of packing curls. I don't even remember where we got them. We may have swiped them from somewhere, or we may have taken them from a dumpster behind one of the department stores in town. And we took these packing curls, these 2 boxes of packing curls, or maybe it was even just one large box. We took them in the middle of the night to the guy's yard, and we proceeded to strew them all over the yard, knowing that it would be very difficult for him to rake them up because the curls were just small enough to slip between the tines of a rake that you use for raking leaves. So sure enough, the next day we drove by there, and the poor guy was out in the yard trying to rake up these packing curls with a rake, but he wasn't succeeding very well, and of course he didn't have any other way of gathering them, so eventually he had to pick them up one at a time, or handfuls at a time, and since they were all over his yard, that took him quite a bit of time. So that was another Halloween story that I wanted to tell, just to show you that, back in the day, as it were, Halloween was a little more mischievous, and it could be destructive at times, and that's not a good thing, but it was also kind of fun. And so I'm not recommending any of this, I'm just telling you what happened, and I will take the Fifth Amendment, I'll plead the Fifth Amendment if anybody pushes me on this. But in any event, the last thing I wanted to say about Halloween is that the night after we put the packing curls on the guy's yard, then I remember we were driving around later in the night, and this is when the fear came back, but this time it was fear about something real, because I don't know who they were, but there were these people, there must have been about 10 or 15 of them, who were just sort of roving back and forth across the neighborhood, and they had like hoods, pillowcases over their heads with eye holes. They weren't members of the Ku Klux Klan or anything like that as far as I knew, but there was something sinister about that. They were carrying clubs and all kinds of like baseball bats and things of that sort. So this must have been around midnight or maybe a little bit after, and I remember being rather afraid about that because fortunately we were in the car and we could keep going, but I didn't know who they were or what they were doing. But that was an example of fear, this kind of very primitive emotion of fear. But in this case, unlike in the vampire case from Salem's Lot, there really was something to be afraid of. So that's what I wanted to say. And now I'm going to go to bed. Let me just take one more turn in my fall outfit so that I can model it for you. And then I'm going to go to sleep. And I do hope that everybody has an enjoyable holiday. I'm going to get ready for bed now, and so let me just unbutton my dress, and maybe next time I can say some more about scary movies, or some things that, some other Halloween-related themes that maybe you will enjoy. I hope everybody will have a very spooky Halloween for a change. I hope so, but in any event, this is Katje, Good Witch Katje, and I'm getting ready to go to bed now, so I will take one last turn. I have some very comfortable sleepwear on, which I also wanted to show you. But until next time, this is Katje, wishing everybody a safe and enjoyable evening and a very happy Halloween ahead of the day. Bye-bye.